the world that waited to be born. Part 1. The Still World. The Kairos mining vessel had no windows. It had no need of them. Nothing worth seeing in its line of work could be observed with naked eyes. Asteroids were too dark, seams too deeply buried, fragments too numerous, distances too dishonest. To look, the Kairos used radars, swarms, neutrino interferometers, short-range gravitational lenses, spectrometers, penetration probes, density maps, and a mechanical patience no living being could have sustained for years. From the outside, it was ugly in an honest way. A central cylinder 4 kilometers long, surrounded by storage rings, processing bays, ice tanks, docking spines, and assembly arms that could unfold until they turned the vessel into a structure almost 20 times larger than its main body. It was not designed to enter atmospheres or impress anyone. It was a factory with engines, a refinery that knew how to move, a narrow, silent, obedient city built to pursue raw material in regions where no city ought to exist. In the company's records, it was listed as a dorsal class extraction unit, operating license 8144, property of the Oral Deep Matter Consortium. In the voices of its 5 crew members, it was simply the ship. The ship had been away from home for 7 years. Not 7 years, according to the civil calendar of Nuria, the crew's home planet, but 7 years of lived time on its decks, between watch shifts, recycled meals, simulated skies, performance reports, and family calls arriving with ever longer delays. Relativity had given them a few administrative discrepancies, but not enough to fool exhaustion. The body knew nothing of reference frames when it woke for the 4th time in an artificial cycle without having set foot on real ground. The Oral Consortium paid well precisely because it offered no comfort. Its ships did not extract minerals from convenient moons or nearby belts, where a failure could be solved with parts sent from a neighboring station. They worked at the edges of systems in debris clouds, swarms of dead comets, and accretion regions where the star's light was a distant courtesy. There, mining had stopped resembling an industry and become a form of armed cartography. Find mass, classify it, break it apart if necessary, melt it, purify it, package it, and send it inward, toward the worlds where people could still forget what their comfort was made of. The Kairos was good at that. Not because its crew touched much. Almost no one touched anything on a modern mining ship. The workers were autonomous swarms, tractor probes, drilling arms, vacuum printers, welding drones, thermal worms capable of opening tunnels through nitrogen ice, anchor spiders that clung to spinning rocks, and machines as small as seeds that entered an asteroid through microfractures to listen to its interior. The 5 living beings aboard did not chip stone, descend in magnetic boots onto unstable surfaces, or repair valves exposed to radiation. They coordinated. In the manuals, that verb looked modest. In practice, it meant deciding when thousands of machines should approach a body that rotated badly, how much heat could be injected before a valuable ice reserve was vaporized, what trajectory a 30 million ton block of iron would follow after being cut, what navigational error would turn a cargo load into a projectile, which sensor noise was dust, and which was a crack growing toward disaster. The Kairos crew consisted of 5 people because the company had calculated that 4 reduced psychological redundancy too much, and 6 increased consumption without a proportional benefit. The calculation appeared exactly that way, with an almost obscene frankness, in the internal documents. In command was Arlen Darrow, mission supervisor and legal officer responsible for every decision an algorithm could not later justify. He was 48, broad-handed, with a voice that rarely rose in volume, and a habit of listening to the end even after he had made up his mind. Before deep mining, he had worked in orbital traffic engineering, a cleaner and more respected profession. He never explained why he had left. When someone pressed too hard, he said he had discovered, late in life, that he preferred objects that did not pretend to be still. Second was Maiva Sen, mass analyst and computational geologist, although the word geologist had become insufficient once the objects under study might never have belonged to a planet. Maiva read densities the way others read faces. From a gravitational map she could recognize a fragment's thermal history, the ancient impact that had split it. the place where a metal seam had been trapped beneath layers of dirty ice. She was young to be so far away, or so, said people who still believed youth ought to be spent near the light. She replied that the inner worlds were full of people offering opinions about what others would go looking for in the dark. Tovan Airy was a dynamics pilot, which did not mean driving the ship but negotiating with inertia. His work consisted of choosing routes that did not look like routes. Gravity assists, thermal braking, minimal thrusts, pauses that saved fuel at the cost of weeks, accelerations only a huge and patient structure could endure. Tovan distrusted straight lines. He said they were a fantasy invented by species that had evolved by walking. Sel Ivara supervised the autonomous swarms. She did not call them drones, not because she was fond of them, though she was, but because the word seemed too simple for machines that could improvise solutions within strict margins, divide tasks among themselves, sacrifice one unit to save a processing node, or rewrite priorities when a rock decided to split in a way nobody had modeled. Sel spoke little with the crew, and a great deal with the machines. Machines, at least, did not ask about her previous life. The fifth was Ren Vask, physician, closed-system biologist, and wellness officer by contractual obligation. On a ship where almost nothing biological ought to fail, his job was to prevent the little that remained from failing. He checked intestinal flora, sleep cycles, bone microfractures, immunity, mood, aggression, memory, and an uncomfortable list of indicators the company called operational stability. Ren hated the term. To him, it was a way of saying health without admitting that people mattered. 5 people, 1 enormous ship, 10,000 machines, 700 million kilometers of assigned work zones, and no reasonable expectation of help. That last part was not said at the beginning of missions, it was taught. The oral consortium was not cruel in the theatrical way favored by old fiction. It did not threaten employees with expulsion through an airlock, sabotage its ships to conceal mistakes, or send suicidal orders accompanied by corporate anthems. All of that was inefficient. The company preferred something more stable than cruelty: accounting. Every contract included a section called Logistical Impossibility of Rapid Rescue. It ran to 22 pages, with diagrams and equations. It explained why an extraction mission could be profitable in regions where a rescue mission was not. Recovering a damaged ship allowed for slow engines, heavy tugs, low consumption trajectories, and deadlines measured in years. Saving crew required speed, medical redundancy, reserved fuel, collision risk, narrow windows, specialized teams, and the unpleasant possibility of losing more resources while trying to save people who could no longer produce them. There was no malice in the text. That made it worse. The case everyone remembered was the Lady of Copper. It had happened only 32 astronomical units from Nemora base, close by deep mining standards, almost the neighborhood. A radiation shield failure had compromised the habitable module. 46 crew members were still alive when they sent the alert. 3 fast ships could have arrived in time if the base agreed to empty its reserves, cancel 2 convoys, and risk a supply window into the inner system. Management chose something else: divert a returning freighter, push its speed to the authorized limit, and prepare medical chambers to receive survivors. The freighter arrived late. It rescued 3. Months later, a Trez-class tug intercepted the Lady of Copper, stabilized its spin, dragged it to Nemora, and delivered it for repair. The ship returned to service under another name. The company paid full compensation, funded discreet memorials, updated its protocols, and used the incident for years as an example of the objective harshness of deep space. Everyone on the Kairos knew the story. They did not often speak of it. They did not need to. It was present whenever a yellow alert remained active too long, whenever a fatigue report crossed a red line, whenever a critical part had to be fabricated aboard because asking home for it meant admitting that the problem already belonged to the past. The ship's solitude was not poetic, it was contractual. And yet Arlen did not hate his work. There was beauty in an operation done well. It was there when an irregular asteroid became an orderly cloud of materials separated by density, purity, and destination. It was there in the thermal maps, cell raised over surfaces never touched by nearby light. in the impossible routes Tavan traced between wandering masses, in the way Maiva could look at a reading and say, here there was heat, here there was pressure, here a world that never came to be kept something inside itself. Even Ren, who pretended to despise mining, admitted that the Kairos' closed systems were a small moral feat. Nothing was wasted because anything could kill. Nuria needed such feats. The crew's home planet was not dying. That was a useful exaggeration for political speeches and a terrible one for clear thinking. Its oceans were still alive, its cities were not burning, its atmosphere was breathable, its orbital fields provided enough energy to support a comfortable civilization. But Nuria had learned an old lesson. A species that grows until it rules several systems discovers that local abundance is a broader form of scarcity. There was no shortage of iron, carbon, or water. There was a shortage of certain isotopes, of certain extraordinarily rare natural superconductors, of certain heavy nuclei, useful for compaction reactors. There was a shortage of materials formed only in particular generations of dead stars, or in impacts chance would not repeat on command, or in bodies expelled from old systems before anyone existed to give them names. And there was another pressure, slower and less visible. Nuria's civilization had been born late in a galaxy that was beginning to understand its own future solitude. Distant galaxies were already withdrawing toward a horizon no engine could pursue. Regions not bound by gravity were receding with an indifference that admitted no negotiation. It was not a crisis for tomorrow or the next century. It was a sentence written on scales that humiliated every calendar. But technical cultures have a strange relationship with slow catastrophes. If they can measure them, they begin to obey them. For generations, Nuria had shifted its politics toward accumulation. Not accumulation in the common sense of wealth, but in the almost religious sense of reserve. Useful matter, accessible energy, redundant archives, biosphere seeds, deep computation, autonomous habitats, memory. Vaults were built on frozen moons, shipyards at equilibrium points, antimatter stores in remote orbits, heavy element banks beneath mountains no recent war could justify. Every decade, public reports repeated a sentence that no longer impressed anyone and was therefore more dangerous. What we do not gather now will be farther away later. The Kairos was a small tool within that enormous anxiety. Its current campaign was unfolding beyond the Avron system. An orange star with 3 useless planets, 2 debris belts, and a cloud of icy objects warped by the ancient passage of another star. There were no permanent colonies, only automated stations, beacons, emergency depots, and the Kairos, which had spent 19 months processing fragments rich in osmium, iridium, and deuterium compounds trapped in black ice. The day of the discovery began without any shape of day. On the ship, morning was a lighting decision. At 6 in the internal cycle, the walls of the common module shifted from faint blue to warm white. The tables printed breakfasts that looked different because their textures changed, not because their ingredients did. Ren looked disapprovingly at Tovin's stimulant intake. Cell arrived late, her hair still damp from a mist shower that used no more than half a liter. Maiva ate in silence, reading the results of 3 probes buried in a porous comet from the surface of her cup. Arlen half listened to a message from his sister that had left Nuria 28 days earlier. In the message, his nephew was walking for the first time. The child crossed a Reule-lit courtyard, taking 3 clumsy steps between 2 laughing adults. Arlen watched him fall onto his hands, startle, and rise again with the absolute stubbornness bodies possess before they learn the word failure. Then the image froze. The rest of the packet had been corrupted in transit. Arlen stood for a moment looking at the last frame. Then he accepted the shift report. The anomaly appeared in a search that was not supposed to find anything interesting. One of the Kairos's lensing arrays was calibrating the stellar background to correct errors in the mass of a cluster of fragments. It was a dull, automatic, necessary task. The software compared the apparent positions of distant stars with old catalogs and subtracted distortions produced by dust, plasma, and known objects. In the middle of that cleaning, a small persistent curvature appeared, moving against the background field. At first, the system classified it as a correlation error. then as a low-mass wandering object. Then it withdrew the classification. Maiva was the first to see it. She did not call anyone immediately. That was one of the reasons Arlen trusted her. Premature emotion was a way of contaminating data. She reviewed the frames, asked 2 passive antennas to repeat the measurement, consulted Avron's local object archive, corrected for the proper motion of the background stars, ruled out a thermal shadow from the auxiliary engines, and only then opened an internal channel. "Arlen," she said, "I need your eyes on mass analysis." The sentence did not sound urgent. That was precisely why Arlen left what he was doing. When he arrived, Maiva had switched off the map's decorative layers. A nearly empty region of space floated above the central table, crossed by pale lines marking known trajectories. Comets, rocks, company probes, a dead beacon, the Kairos' own route. At the edge of the map was a point without a name. "Interstellar object," Arlen said. "That's what I thought." "Velocity?" Maiva enlarged the reading. The point dragged a thin, too clean blue curve behind it. "High for a wanderer, but not impossible. It isn't bound to Avron. It came from outside, will cross the outer system and leave. Then congratulations, you found a rock we can't sell." Maiva did not smile. "Look at the mass." Arlen looked. For a second he thought he had misunderstood the scale. The object had an estimated radius of nearly 1,400 kilometers, smaller than a large moon, but far too large for its dynamic mass to make sense. Its thermal emission was almost non-existent. Its albedo was low. The spectral reading suggested a frozen surface. Solid nitrogen, methane, traces of carbon monoxide, dark dust accumulated during a long journey. All of that was rare, but acceptable. The galaxy produced exiles effortlessly, worlds thrown from their birth systems, orphan planets sailing between stars with internal oceans, dead cores wrapped in ice, debris from ancient gravitational migrations. The mass was not acceptable. "That won't fit in there," Arlen said. "No," Maiva replied. "Not even if it were pure iron. Not even if we assume extreme compression. Not even if we are wrong about the radius by an insulting factor." Tovan arrived soon after, still fastening his uniform collar. Sel appeared with 2 portable screens under her arm. Ren, summoned more by the low tone of the voices than by any formal alarm, remained by the door. For an hour, the Kairos stopped being a factory and became an observatory. They measured the object with every instrument that could be aimed without disrupting the mining operation. Long-range radar, barely a return, smooth surface at large scales, low roughness beneath layers of ice. Infrared, deep cold, colder than expected for a body that had just crossed dimly lit regions of the system. Spectrometry, volatile ices, contaminating silicates, possible metallic inclusions beneath the crust. Dynamics, a clear hyperbolic trajectory. Lensing, an absurd mass. "It could be a primordial black hole with an ice shell," Tovan said, because someone had to say the ridiculous thing aloud so it would stop circling them. Ren looked at him. "Is that a joke?" "I hope so." Maiva slowly shook her head. "If there were an uncontained black hole in that mass range, the environment would be different. We would have accretion, radiation, perturbations, heating, not a ball of nitrogen so calm it looks asleep." "Degenerate matter," Sel suggested. "Remains of a stellar core. Not with that surface, not with that radius, and not traveling like that without leaving a more violent signature." Arlen studied the map. "How long until the close pass?" Tovan was already calculating. 112 days to minimum distance from our current position. Less if we adjust course. It will pass inside the extended operating zone, but nowhere near a civilian route. Risk. For us, none if we do the sensible thing. Define sensible. Look at it from far away and let it continue on its way. Maiva did not take her eyes from the mass reading. The base won't want that. She was right. The data package took 3 hours and 16 minutes to reach Nemora, the consortium's regional base. The reply took the same amount of time to return, plus 7 minutes of executive processing, which everyone aboard interpreted as a bad sign. Simple decisions did not require committees. The message appeared in the operations room under the gray seal of corporate scientific priority. Arlen opened it before the whole crew. The voice of Lyra Kion, remote campaign director, sounded clear and carefully neutral. Kairos, we have received anomaly 77A. Our teams confirm the inconsistency between estimated radius and dynamic mass. Effective immediately, secondary extraction in the Avron C sector is suspended and observation resources are reassigned to the object. Maintain passive distance until further notice. We need surface composition, orbital refinement, an estimate of material value, and any indication of non-natural activity. There was a brief pause. It was not dramatic, it was the delay of a badly disguised edit. The anomaly contains preliminary spectral concentrations of strategic interest. Repeat, strategic interest. Proceed with caution. Nemora will notify the Reserve Authority and the Systems Council if the data survive second validation. The message ended. Cell let air out through her nose. Strategic interest. What an elegant way to say someone has smelled money. Not necessarily money, Maiva said. Something rarer. She was right. For the next several days, the Kairos followed the object with all the attention it could spare. Mining was reduced to low-risk automated processes. The machines kept cutting and packaging matter, but no one pretended that was still the main work. The wandering point occupied the center of the screens, the conversations, the silences. Even when nobody spoke of it, everyone knew where it was. They called it Ilar. The name was Ren's. In a coastal language of Nuria, it meant something close to that which passes without staying. It was not an exact term. Good names almost never were. Ilar was drawing near. Each measurement made the previous one less reasonable. Its crust seemed to consist of nitrogen and methane glaciers hardened over ages, mixed with interstellar soot and layers of amorphous ice. There were enormous craters, some so eroded they might have belonged to impacts that occurred before its original expulsion. Others looked too clean. There was no atmosphere worthy of the name, only minimal exhalations when a region received a little stellar warmth, no fast rotation, no radio emission, no detected internal heat. And beneath all that, something answered the instruments like an obscene reserve of heavy metals. Not a seam, not a conventional mineral core, a distribution too extensive of elements that on Nuria were stored under military protection. Osmium, iridium, platinum, transuranic nuclei in proportions that forced the analyses to be repeated. Superconducting compounds that, if confirmed, would make 3 generations of deep mining look like a search for crumbs. The Reserve Authority replied before the Council. Then the Council replied. Afterward, in a gesture nobody aboard found reassuring, both sent a joint message. Arlen received it privately and played it for the crew afterward. There was no kind way to conceal it. Kairos unit, said a voice that did not identify itself by name. Anomaly Ilar is hereby reclassified as an object of provisional civilizational priority. Due to the current distance and the absence of scientific vehicles within an interception window, controlled approach by the present unit is authorized and required. Your primary mission is now physical characterization, risk assessment, and determination of future extractive feasibility. The operation is under joint supervision of the Oral Consortium, the Reserve Authority, and the Systems Council. Toven closed his eyes. When 3 entities supervise a decision, none of them intends to accept the blame. The message continued. Physical contact with the object is not ordered except by subsequent authorization. Manned descent is not authorized. Drilling into primary structure is not authorized. Maintain withdrawal capability. Any additional anomaly must be reported before proceeding. Ren looked at Arlen. That last part means we'll proceed before they can answer. It means they know, Arlen said. The Kairos changed course. It was not an abrupt gesture. Large ships rarely had the right to abruptness. For 11 days, Tavan fed the trajectory with small, cumulative, carefully spaced accelerations. The ship left its assigned fragments behind, abandoned temporary anchors, recovered swarms, shut down furnaces, compacted stores, and leaned toward Ilar's path like an enormous animal deciding to look at something moving in the distance. The crew worked well. Perhaps too well. Arlen knew that kind of efficiency. It appeared when fear found a task. Cell reviewed every exploratory swarm, discarded units with even minor wear, fabricated new tips for sampling drones, and prepared thermal worms capable of crossing ice at temperatures that would have made ordinary steel brittle. Maiva built contradictory internal models and killed them one by one. Tavan simulated escape routes. Ren doubled the medical checks, as if he could anticipate a physical threat that still had no shape. On day 64, Maiva found the second impossibility. It was not a mass reading. It was a speed reading. "It's slowing down," she said. Arlen was alone with her in analysis. For a moment, he thought she meant an adjustment in the calculation. Interstellar objects seemed to change speed when models improved. Perturbations were corrected, or a distant star proved more massive than recorded. That kind of slowing belonged not to the object, but to the ignorance of the person watching it. Maiva would not have used that voice for such a thing. How much? She projected the curve. The hyperbolic trajectory was still there, but the velocity did not obey Avron's gravity. Ilar was losing momentum, not much at first, enough to require review. Then more, the deceleration was smooth, continuous, absurdly clean. Anisotropic sublimation? Arlen asked. No jet, no detectable mass loss, no heating, no compatible orientation. Interaction with dust. Insufficient by 9 orders of magnitude. Our error. Maiva looked at him, not offended, tired. I hope so. It was not. For 30 hours, the Kairos devoted itself to proving that the universe was not doing what it appeared to be doing. Cell checked sensors. Tavan recalculated gravitational perturbations. Maiva compared the data against external catalogs. Ren, who had nothing useful to contribute to orbital dynamics, prepared mild sedatives and offered them to no one. Nemora received incomplete packets, requested confirmations, sent questions, and received worse answers. In the end, the conclusion was written with an almost offensive sobriety. Object Ilar changes its velocity without any observable external mechanism. Nemora's next reply did not come from Director Kion. It came from the Systems Council. The file took longer to decrypt because it contained governmental authentication layers. When it opened, there was no face, only text, a synthetic voice, and a list of activated protocols. Possible non-natural object. Unknown risk. Preventive civil interdiction. Scientific chain of custody. By simple proximity, the Kairos had become an instrument of first investigation. No other ship could arrive within 17 months. There was no military probe on a suitable trajectory. There was no observatory close enough to obtain better data. There was, in short, nobody else. The crew listened to the message in silence. Then Cell said, I love it when history decides to save on personnel. Nobody laughed. Ilar kept slowing. It did so for weeks, as if obeying an internal patience. The Kairos adjusted course to maintain a safe distance, although the word safe began to lose meaning. Safe distance from what? From an icy planet? From a mass that did not generate the gravity it should? From an object that decelerated without ejecting anything? From a mineral reserve that could change the economic balance of several systems? From a possibility nobody wanted to name too early? Arlen slept little. When he slept, he dreamed of his nephew taking 3 steps across a sunlit courtyard. The child always fell before reaching an edge that did not exist in the original video. Arlen woke with the absurd feeling that he had to warn him about something. 91 days after first sighting, Ilar stopped. Not in an absolute sense, because nothing stops relative to the universe. It stopped relative to Avron's local frame with a precision that seemed chosen to insult astronomers. Its residual speed fell below that of many bound asteroids. Its trajectory ceased to be a visit and became a presence. A wandering planet had just parked itself outside a system where nobody expected it. It took the Kairos 12 hours to receive the order everyone knew would come. Approach. No contact yet. Close observation. Deploy autonomous probes. Surface assessment. Deep structure assessment. Arlen read the packet twice, Then he closed it. Tavan, approach route with withdrawal open. Already have it. Cell prepares surface and penetration swarms. No aggressive drilling. Thermal worms can descend without fracturing the ice if the ice cooperates. Maiva, I want a local gravity model before we cross the first threshold. She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on Ilar's image. Arlen. Yes. There's a crater. She enlarged it. Ilar filled the central table. For the first time, the object stopped being a number and acquired a face. It was dark, almost black, covered in plains of old ice and gentle features beneath a layer of frozen dust. There were circular scars, collapsed valleys, regions where the crust seemed to have flowed slowly over immense spans of time. Avron's distant light barely outlined the relief. It looked less like a world than the cold memory of one. The crater Maiva had marked was not the largest. That made it worse. It lay near the region that, from the Kairos' perspective, faced almost directly toward them. Its edges were clean, its diameter moderate, its depth impossible for an ordinary impact. Radar shadows descended through it as through a well. The models indicated that it penetrated more than 150 kilometers into the outer crust without narrowing significantly. An impact like that would have destroyed the object, Ren said. If it was an impact, Maiva replied. Tovan rotated the image. When Ilar finished slowing, it turned that crater toward us. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Arlen felt, with uncomfortable clarity, the room change temperature without any sensor recording it. Until then, they had been chasing an anomaly. Now the anomaly seemed to have shown them an entrance. It could be coincidence, Ren said. Yes, Arlen said. He added nothing. In deep space, coincidence was a respectable explanation. It was also a word that could be used too many times in a row until it stopped protecting anyone. The first probes descended 22 hours later. There was no heroic descent, no flame, no dust kicked up by visible engines, no shadow crossing a landscape beneath music. The units detached from the Kairos like black seeds and fell toward Ilar along trajectories calculated not to contaminate samples. Some remained in low orbit. Others touched the surface on slender legs and measured hardness, temperature, composition. Thermal worms entered methane glaciers, advanced centimeters per minute, and left behind sealed tunnels that slowly closed as the ice relaxed. The surface was real. That comforted Ren more than he wanted to admit. There was ice, dust, microcraters, thermal fractures, expected molecules, impurities. The world was not an illusion or an entirely false shell. For a while, Ilar allowed itself to seem like a natural object with a strange history. Then the crater probe entered the throat. They had called it Third Deep, because Cell had no patience for elegant names on machines that might not return. It entered along the crater's inner wall, using electromagnetic anchors and cold gas microthrusters. During the first kilometers, it found compressed ice, layers of solid nitrogen, methane seams, carbon dust. At greater depth, the ice became cleaner. Too clean. The walls kept an almost constant width. Irregularities smoothed out. The crater stopped looking like a wound and began looking like a tunnel covered by geological skin. The first internal anomaly was not visual. It was vectorial. At 136 kilometers, the probe's accelerometers stopped agreeing with the geometry. The tunnel still pointed toward Ilar's center, but local gravity no longer pulled in that direction. It tilted. Not much at first, 1 degree, then 3, then 12, as if something were taking the word down and moving it toward one of the walls. Cell suspected a calibration failure. So did the probe. It restarted its instruments, compared gyroscopes, released a test sphere, and recorded its fall. The sphere did not descend toward the bottom of the tunnel. It rolled toward the lower wall and stayed there, stuck to the ice, as if that curved surface had decided to become the floor. From that point, Third Deep did not descend anymore. It advanced. Its legs reoriented, its microthrusters corrected the transit, and the probe continued along the wall the gravitational field offered as a floor. Geometrically, it was traveling toward the center of a planet. Physically, it was moving through a corridor. Third Deep transmitted without pause. Arlen, Maiva, and Cell remained in the operations room. Tavan watched the orbital position. Ren pretended to review medical data from a secondary console. At 151 kilometers, the probe detected metal. At 158, it lost lateral readings for 3 seconds. At 166, the tunnel ended. An obstruction appeared on the screen. Not a mineral accumulation, not a rock wall, not an exposed core, a wall. The surface was smooth to the limit of the camera's resolution, dark gray, with no visible seams, no corrosion, no crystals, no pores. The probe illuminated the area with 3 wavelengths. The wall returned each at a different efficiency, as if deciding how much it would allow the instruments to learn. Cell ordered a texture sweep. The screen showed an almost perfect plane. Maiva moved closer to the image. That surrounds the planet. Arlen looked at her. You can't know that. Not yet. 16 hours later, she could. Penetration readings, gravitational tomography, and low-frequency resonance drew an inner sphere. The data were incomplete, but the geometric intent was clear. Beneath 166 kilometers of crust made of ices and dust, Reule contained a structural layer of unknown material, approximately 1 kilometer thick at the tunnel, perhaps more elsewhere. The surface of that sphere had a radius close to 1,230 kilometers. It surrounded something the instruments could not resolve. The impossible mass did not come from the layer, the ices, or anything distributed in an ordinary way. The third impossibility arrived with the local gravity map. From far away, Reule bent trajectories like a body of enormous mass. Near the surface, however, the probes did not weigh what they should. Gravity was moderate, compatible with a small planet of dense composition, not with the monster demanded by the orbital calculations. A unit resting on the crater's rim could move normally. A stone lifted by a mechanical arm fell as it should on a smaller world. The outer field and the surface field did not agree. That isn't geology, Tovan said. Maiva did not answer. Her eyes were red from too many hours without sleep. No, she said at last, it's engineering. The word entered the ship and left it changed. Engineering. Not life, not present intelligence, not a threat yet, just engineering. The coldest and most immense idea that something had designed a wandering world with a false or contained mass, a planetary surface, an inner sphere, an entrance aimed at the only nearby ship, and a mechanism capable of stopping after crossing interstellar darkness. The Council took 6 hours to answer the report. This time it did not repeat the prohibition on manned descent. It modified it. Exceptional authorization for in-person inspection, subject to the mission supervisor's judgment, if autonomous systems fail to obtain samples of primary structure, and local risk assessment remains within biological tolerances. Ren read the sentence aloud with a calm that fooled no one. That is a legal way of saying that if you decide to go down, it was your idea. Yes, Arlen said. Cell folded her arms. The drones can't cut the wall. They can't scrape it, heat it, or make it vibrate. One tried to anchor itself, and the anchor came apart before touching the surface, as if the material canceled the field. I don't know what it expects a person in gloves to do. Maybe nothing, Maiva said. They all looked at her. She did not take her eyes from the projected wall. Maybe that's the point. Arlen understood what he did not want to understand. The machines had reached the end of the tunnel and nothing had happened. They had illuminated, struck it with signals, measured it, tried to take samples. The wall had remained closed, indifferent, perfect, but Reule had turned its entrance toward them. It had slowed. It had allowed them to approach. It had built or preserved a geometry that seemed less defensive than selective. Maybe it was not waiting for machines. The discussion lasted 40 minutes. Ren objected because it was his duty, and because he was right. Cell objected because she trusted machines more than symbolic gestures, and was also right. Tavan only asked how long he would need to get the Kairos away if something changed in the gravitational field. Maiva did not ask to go down. In her, that amounted to a severe form of prudence. In the end, Arlen chose. I'll go, he said. Not alone, Maiva replied. She did not say it as an offer, she said it as a correction. Arlen would have preferred to argue. He did not. Maiva understood the wall's readings better than anyone, and if what they found required an immediate scientific decision, he did not want to be alone with his ignorance. Besides, he thought without saying it, if something went wrong, 2 witnesses could become 2 victims. The moral difference was small, but not non-existent. Ren prepared them without drama. Surface suits without heavy shielding, because local gravity did not justify exoskeletons, and the tunnel would not accommodate bulky equipment. Thermal layers for extreme cold, redundant biometric sensors. Continuous camera, a communications line through autonomous repeaters deployed in the crater. Medical injectors, escort microdrones, return beacons, useless blades, sampling tools that would probably be useless. Descent harnesses for the first few meters, before the inner field did its work. Anchor boots in case it decided to stop doing so. A list of emergencies too long to memorize and too incomplete to offer comfort. Before sealing Arlen's helmet, Ren held it by the rim. I don't need bravery from you. What a relief. I'm serious. If something doesn't fit, come back. Arlen gave the faintest smile. Nothing fits, Ren. Then come back before it fits even worse. Maiva was already waiting in the airlock, checking her wrist instruments for the 3rd time. She looked calm. Arlen had learned that in her, calm could be a form of concentration or a form of fear. Sometimes both used the same face. The descent to Ilar was brief. An inspection shuttle carried them from the Kairos to the crater's rim. They did not pilot it. Nobody piloted descents like that, except in stories told by people who had never actually calculated a landing on nitrogen ice. The shuttle chose a stable area, extended broad legs, released minimal heat to avoid contaminating the surface, and went still beneath a sky without an atmosphere. Arlen was first to step out. The ground creaked beneath his boot, not from fragility, but because the sound traveled through the suit. Ilar offered no generous horizon. The curvature was too near, the light too poor, the landscape too still. Above them, Avron was a bright star unable to send warmth. Farther away, the Kairos crossed the black sky like a line of work forgotten by the gods. Maiva descended behind him. Local gravity stable, she said. How much? 0.38 standard, exactly within the range predicted by the probes, and completely incompatible with the external mass. Yes. They walked toward the crater. There was no wind, no drifting dust, no sound except their breathing, the suit's soft warnings, and the scrape of boots against a world that might not be a world. With each step, Arlen expected a signal, a vibration, a light beneath the ice, a change in the horizon. Ilar did nothing. The tunnel entrance was worse up close. It did not have the violence of an impact. The edges looked eroded enough to satisfy time, but beneath that erosion was a stubborn symmetry. It was not a cave or a gallery. It was a radial shaft open toward Ilar's interior, an almost cylindrical throat cutting through the ice toward the planet's center. From outside, anyone would have said there was only one thing to do there: fall. Third Deep's data said otherwise. 136 kilometers below, the field changed. Gravity stopped pointing toward the center and leaned against one wall of the tunnel, turning that wall into the floor. It did not eliminate the fall, it translated it. It did not make the throat less impossible. It made it traversable. That was what made the image intolerable. The shaft did not look as if it descended toward a mine, but toward the place where a world decided what down meant. Third Deep's first repeater waited a few meters from the edge, anchored to the inner wall. Cell spoke over the channel. The probe just recognized you. It is offended that you took so long. Tell it we'll do our best to deserve its patience, Arlen replied. I'm not going to lie to it. The exchange helped less than it would have somewhere else. Cell had prepared something else for them. Beside the first repeater waited a low, six-legged vehicle with an enclosed cabin barely large enough for 2 suits. It was not a shuttle or a surface rover. It was a transit unit built from Third Deep's architecture: proximity sensors, electromagnetic anchors, cold gas microthrusters, and a system capable of redefining the floor each time the gravity vector changed. Cell had assembled it on the Kairos and sent it ahead while they prepared. "I'm not making you walk 166 kilometers," she said over the channel. "The ship has plenty of resources for many stupid things, but not for that." "Are you piloting it?" Maiva asked. "I'm supervising it. The vehicle drives better than I do when the floor decides to turn sideways." The joke could not hide that she had spent hours tuning the navigation algorithm. Even so, the vehicle did not depend on continuous communication with the Kairos. Third Deep had left beacons every few kilometers, and the unit could follow them, recognize the local field, and stop if the geometry changed abruptly again. They installed a safety line at the edge and entered in turns, backs to the void, harnesses locked, boots searching for purchase on a wall that was not yet a floor. During the first few meters, Arlen's body understood the situation in the simplest and oldest way. There was depth beneath him, and he was descending into it. Then gravity began to move. There was no jolt, no immediate vertigo, only a brief hesitation of the body, an argument between the eyes and the inner ear. Weight stopped pulling toward the bottom of the shaft and slid toward the wall beneath his boots. The harness went slack. The line, which an instant earlier had been saving him from a fall, lay loose against his shoulder. Arlen stood still. So did Maiva. "I confirm rotation of the local vector," she said in a voice that was too controlled. "It matches Third Deep." "How much?" 91 degrees relative to radial, within margin. Cell spoke from the Kairos. "You have just gone from shaft to hallway." Ren found nothing funny in that. "Keep the lines on." They kept them on for another 50 meters. After that they served no purpose except to remind them that trust was a bad habit. Arlen let go first. Maiva waited 1 second longer. The vehicle descended toward them with its legs folded against its body. When the field finished turning, it reoriented without a jolt and fixed itself to the wall that now served as floor. Arlen and Maiva climbed aboard. Cell closed the cabin from orbit and started the unit moving. The trip to the inner sphere took 4 hours and 20 minutes. It was neither a fall nor an endless walk. The vehicle advanced at moderate speed, following Third Deep's beacons and braking whenever the gravitational field demanded a new orientation. 166 kilometers gave the body time to understand the lie. Geometrically, they descended toward Ilar's center. Physically, they moved along an ice wall the inner field converted into ground. Above their heads was not a ceiling, but the opposite wall of the cylinder, curved and distant. To either side, surfaces rose like the ribs of an architecture, pretending to have been excavated by an impact. With every vibration of the vehicle, the body accepted the lie a little better. The tunnel absorbed the little exterior light there was. Their lamps drew pale blue-black surfaces. In some stretches the ice was so clear it returned internal shadows, as though every wall had depth behind it. In others, frozen dust made dark veins that looked like writing, until one remembered that fear was very good at inventing alphabets. Maiva took readings every few meters. Temperature stable. Radiation low. Magnetic field nearly non-existent. Gravitational gradient normal. Arlen listened. He counted breaths too. He did not know why. Halfway there, communication with the Kairos suffered a brief drop. Less than a second. The repeaters corrected it. "We saw that," Cell said from above. "Cause." "Nothing I like." They continued. The end of the tunnel appeared first as an absence. The lamps stopped vanishing into the distance and found a surface that returned no ordinary reflection. Then the wall filled everything. The vehicle stopped 5 meters from it and secured its legs against the gravitational floor. Arlen and Maiva climbed down. Maiva took 2 more steps before going still. In simple terms, they were facing the outer surface of the inner sphere. In geometric terms, they stood 166 kilometers beneath the surface of a wandering world, on a wall that had no right to be a floor. It was different from seeing it through a probe. On the screen, the wall had been evidence. Here it was a presence. It did not seem to have been built in pieces. There were no joints, rivets, crystallization, weathering, tool marks, or damage from time. Light slid over it without shining, as if the surface did not reflect so much as remember having been illuminated. It was dark gray, but that description said little. There was something in its color deeper than pigment, a visual density, a negation. Maiva raised an instrument. I'm going to try a passive reading. No contact. No contact. The instrument emitted 3 weak pulses. Maiva's wrist display went blank for an instant, then restarted its analysis module. Interference, she said. Damage. No, just rejection. Arlen looked at the wall. That isn't a technical category. I know. The Kairos was listening to everything. No one spoke. Maiva knelt beside the tunnel wall where the ice touched the dark surface. She took out a thermal microdrill, not to penetrate the wall, but to collect a sample of deposits accumulated against it. The drill entered the ice easily. Minimal vapor, crystals collected, data, something understandable. Arlen, without knowing why, took a step toward the wall. Arlen, Wren said over the channel. There was no decision in the movement, or at least none he could defend afterward. Maybe he wanted to see whether the surface changed with the angle. Maybe he wanted to prove that remaining still did not frighten him. Maybe, as he would suspect later, some part of him understood that everything before had been an invitation written in the only language available. Trajectory, braking, orientation, silence. He stopped less than a meter away. Keep your distance, Wren said. I am. It was not true. He raised a hand. He did not touch the wall. He held it suspended in the cold space between glove and impossible surface. For a second, nothing happened. Then the wall opened. It did not slide. It did not split. It did not withdraw. A section of darkness simply stopped being wall and became a white entrance, so clean, so luminous, and so alien to the tunnel that Arlen felt he was not looking at a room, but at an error in local reality. Maiva came upright in a single motion. Arlen, back away. He did not answer. Inside there were no visible machines. No consoles, tables, seats, symbols, tools, bodies, cameras, or marks. Only an empty room, its white walls without clear corners, illuminated from nowhere. The light did not spill into the tunnel as it should have. It ended at the threshold. Cell began to say something over the channel. The signal broke on a syllable. Arlen looked at Maiva. She was 3 meters away, one hand extended toward him, eyes wide behind her visor. Don't go in, she said. Arlen thought of the Lady of Copper, of the contract's 22 pages, of his nephew falling in a sunlit courtyard, of a civilization gathering matter because the future was moving away, of a wandering world that had slowed to place itself before them. He thought that some doors did not open for machines. He took a step. Arlen crossed the threshold. White surrounded him. Behind him, Maiva ran toward the entrance. The wall closed before her hands could touch it. Part 2, the Chamber of Thresholds. The first thing Arlen lost was the door. He did not see it close. He heard no mechanism. He felt no vibration in the floor, or change in pressure inside the suit. Simply when he turned, the entrance was no longer there. Where a moment before there had been tunnel, Maiva, helmet light, and gray wall, there was now only a white surface, smooth, unmarked, without memory. Arlen took 2 steps toward it and placed a hand against it. The glove touched something warm. Maiva. His voice sounded inside the helmet with an unpleasant intimacy. The communicator returned nothing. Kairos, this is Darrow. I am inside a chamber. Repeat, I am inside. Requesting link. Silence. Not static. Not interference. Complete silence, as if the room had separated his voice from the rest of the universe and let it fall back inside the helmet. Arlen waited 10 seconds for a response. Then 20. Then he stopped counting because counting had begun to look like a poor way not to be afraid. The chamber was white. That was the first description, and also the worst, because it said almost nothing. It was not the white of a painted wall, a medical light, or polished material. It was a whiteness without visible texture, distributed everywhere, with a uniformity that made orientation impossible. There were no clear corners. The walls curved into floor and ceiling through transitions so soft that the space seemed designed by someone who had no need to distinguish one surface from another. There was no table, no seat, no console, no symbols, no cameras, nothing that could look back at him. That did not reassure him. The suit recorded an elevated heart rate, irregular breathing, muscular tension. The medical system advised him to conserve oxygen and remain still. Arlen looked at the warning for a second before switching it off. "Thank you," he murmured. The room did nothing. During the first hour, Arlen behaved as if he still belonged to a mission. He measured steps, 22 from one wall to the other. He marked a surface with the glove's low-power laser. The red dot appeared and vanished without leaving a trace. He tested transmission on every suit band. Nothing. He activated a short-range emergency beacon. Nothing. He rapped his knuckles against the wall. The sound was small, dry, completely Neurian. He recorded a report in local memory. Chamber sealed, no communication, no visible threat, exterior atmosphere unknown, uniform light, continuous surfaces, no identifiable access. The phrase "no visible threat" stayed in his mind. It was a coward's phrase. Then a section of wall glowed. It was not a screen, it was not a symbol. A fragment of the surface, roughly at eye level, grew brighter for less than a second. Then it went dark. Arlen stood still. The light returned. On, off. A third time. His heart struck his ribs once hard. "Is someone there?" The light did not answer. Arlen raised a hand and tapped 3 times against his own chest plate. 1, 2, 3. The wall remained white. 3, he said, feeling ridiculous. 3 pulses, do you understand? Nothing. The light appeared again, this time to his left. 1 pulse. Pause. Another pulse. Pause. Another. Arlen took a step toward it. The light vanished. For several seconds there was silence. Then sound arrived. At first it was not sound but pressure, a vibration so low the ear barely recognized it and the chest felt it before the mind did. Then the frequency rose. Arlen heard a deep tone pass through the helmet, climb slowly, cross a tolerable range, and continue. It became high, higher. The suit muffled part of the energy, but not all of it. His jaw tightened, his teeth seemed to tremble inside his skull. He put both hands on the helmet. The sound stopped. It did not descend, it did not fade. It cut off at the exact instant his hands touched the sides of the helmet. Arlen breathed with difficulty. "Don't do that." The sound returned. This time it began lower. It climbed with the same patience. Arlen endured it, not out of courage, but because he wanted to know whether it responded to his gesture or to his voice. The frequency reached the painful point. His eyelids closed on their own. The sound stopped. The third time it stopped sooner. The fourth sooner still. The fifth never reached pain. It only brushed the edge where the body began preparing to protect itself. Arlen understood something too soon and did not want to understand it. It was not a call. It was a measurement. The wall before him changed color. A dark red appeared in a horizontal band, then orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. The sequence crossed the visible spectrum and continued beyond it. The visor detected ultraviolet, then infrared, then emissions so faint that the suit recorded them, but Arlen could not see them. The sequence repeated, faster. Then by regions, a point above, one below, one behind him, a line to his right, sudden darkness to the left. Glows that appeared only when he turned his head, glows that vanished when he tried to look directly at them. Arlen closed his eyes. The room knew. The light went out completely. The darkness was absolute, not the dimness of an unlit room, but an absence so closed that the visor seemed to have nothing to interpret. Arlen extended a hand. He touched air. He stepped backward and his back struck the wall. The light returned. He flinched in pain. His pupils reacted before he did. Darkness again. This time he clenched his jaw and did not move. The light took longer to return. The room seemed to be recording which part of him belonged to the eyes and which to fear. Arlen did not formulate that sentence yet. At the time he only thought, "It is testing me." The first day did not end. There was no sunset or pause that could be called rest. The chamber dimmed the light when his vital signs indicated exhaustion, but not enough to let him trust sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, something changed. A vibration beneath his boots, a warm point on his shoulder, a gentle pressure against his chest like a hand too large and too careful. The temperature rose during what his watch marked as the 6th hour. At first it was almost pleasant, then uncomfortable. Then the suit activated internal circulation and began using more energy. The chamber kept warming. There was no visible source, no airflow, only a clean, uniform, deliberate increase. Stop. Nothing. Stop. The thermal indicator reached yellow. Arlen felt sweat on his back. Stop. The temperature stopped rising. It did not fall at once. It held there, just below danger, long enough for Arlen to understand that someone or something was holding the edge with precision. Then it descended degree by degree until it returned to normal. The cold came afterward. It was worse. Heat felt like an invasion. Cold was the withdrawal of the world. It stole sensation from his fingers, tightened the muscles of his face, made his jaw tremble inside the helmet. Arlen did not shout. He waited. The chamber stopped before the suit registered danger. This time he felt ashamed. He had begun to participate. The second day was less physical and more cruel. Pressure changed in tiny intervals. The floor vibrated at frequencies too low to hear but strong enough to alter his balance. The chamber played back his own sounds, breathing, footsteps, blows against the wall, the small noise he had made while containing pain. It did not play them as mockery. That would have been easier to hate. It isolated them, cut them, rearranged them. Maiva. Enough. Darrow, here. Stop. Maiva. Darrow. 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 Shut up, Arlen said. The room fell silent. The obedience was more terrifying than the repetition. For an hour nothing happened. Arlen sat against the wall, not because he trusted it, but because his legs were shaking. He imagined Maiva on the other side, striking a gray surface that would not answer. He imagined Ren watching its biometrics disappear. He imagined Cell sending drones against the wall until she ran out of insults. He imagined Tavon calculating a retreat nobody would want to order. Then the floor moved. It did not open. It did not turn liquid. It merely formed small protuberances beneath the white surface, like elongated grains pushing up from inside. Some remained still, others moved in short lines. Others emerged and vanished before they finished forming. The effect was organic in an unbearable way, as if beneath skin too thin, something were searching for a way out. Arlen sprang to his feet. The protuberances disappeared. A single one formed again, far from him. Small. Slow. It advanced a few centimeters and stopped. No, he said. The protuberance sank. The chamber waited. Then a raised line appeared on the wall at the height of his hand. Then another. Then a series of points, some visible, others so faint they existed only to the touch. Arlen did not want to touch them. The chamber did not insist. It simply kept them there for so long that refusal began to feel like an absurd conversation with a surface. In the end, he ran his fingers over them. The points changed, not beneath his hand afterward, as if they had waited to know that he could feel them. The third day arrived with electricity. First the hair rose on his arms, though the suit covered them. Then the hair beneath the helmet brushed its interior with a dry, unpleasant sensation. The alarms did not activate. According to the numbers, the intensity was low and harmless. His body disagreed. His skin received a rain of invisible needles. No. The intensity rose. No. It rose a little more. Arlen backed up until he touched the wall. No. The field disappeared. It returned weaker over one hand only, then over the other, then around the helmet, then in brief pulses separated by silence. Magnetism arrived an hour later. The tools on his belt vibrated. A buckle stuck to his thigh. The microdrill turned half a degree on its own and stopped. Arlen dropped it clumsily. The chamber reduced the field before the tool struck the floor. It never let damage happen. That did not make it seem any less like torture. On the fourth day, Arlen opened his helmet. Not out of trust, calculation. The suit's oxygen was falling, and for hours the chamber had maintained a compatible exterior atmosphere. Adequate pressure, oxygen, nitrogen, tolerable humidity. No detectable toxins. The sensors could have been deceived. But remaining sealed was also a way to die slowly. Before releasing the lock, he said, "If you wanted to know whether I breathe, you're about to find out." The room did not answer. The first air touched his face with an obscene gentleness. It smelled neither of metal nor ice nor dust nor machinery. It was air without a history, a breathable mixture without a world. He inhaled a little, waited. His body accepted it. He inhaled again. He coughed more from fear than chemistry. The room did not play back the cough. That frightened him more than if it had. Without the helmet, everything worsened. Light touched his eyes directly. Sound entered without a filter. Temperature shifts brushed his skin. A current of air crossed the chamber from no visible opening. Then another came from the opposite direction. Arlen felt moisture on one side of his face and dryness on the other. Then smells appeared. Ozone, barely perceptible ammonia, something sweet that vanished before he could name it, something sour that tightened his throat. The chamber was testing whether the world also entered through the nose. On the fifth day, water appeared. Not as help, as an experiment. A drop formed in the air at eye level, suspended by an invisible field. Arlen looked at it. The drop fell, touched the floor, and disappeared. Another drop. This time it fell impossibly slowly. It took almost a minute to cross a distance that should have taken less than a second. Arlen watched it tremble, change shape, seem to negotiate every centimeter with a private gravity. A third drop did not fall. It floated. Then it rose. Arlen felt a wonder so pure that for a moment he forgot fear. "You are not a room," he whispered. The drop vanished. 4 transparent cascades descended from the ceiling and hardened before touching the floor, forming a glass rectangle around an empty space. Inside it, another drop appeared. It fell normally, then slowly, then sideways. Then it split in two, and each half chose a different direction. Arlen understood with nausea that this was not a demonstration of power either. It was another stimulus. The chamber did not need to intimidate him. If it could manipulate gravity inside such a small volume, if it could maintain air, light, pressure, and fields without visible emitters, it already had complete control. What it was observing was not the drop. It was him watching the drop. Awe, fear, curiosity, paralysis, voice, silence. What does this creature do when its laws stop working? At some point that day, the room offered him drinking water. He did not know when the test had become care. Perhaps it never had. A transparent column rose from the floor with clear liquid inside. The portable analysis showed pure water, too pure with no salts or microorganisms. Arlen waited a long time before drinking. Thirst decided for him. The water tasted like nothing. It fed him afterward with a gray paste tailored to his needs, without cultural texture, without mercy. Arlen ate because the body does not argue much when it understands that it continues to exist. The chamber did not seem interested in his comfort. It was interested in his continuity. The 6th day was almost silent. That made it worse. The room reduced the number of stimuli, but not the surveillance. A lateral light so faint it could be perceived only when he did not look straight at it. A vibration under his feet, followed by a change in smell. A brief tone, followed by soft pressure against his chest. A warm surface beneath his palm, then cold, then rough, then painfully smooth. Small delays between his movement and the non-existent shadow the chamber made for him. There was no conversation. There was a protocol. Arlen began to hate that word because it was the only thing keeping him from thinking about torture. A torturer wants something. The chamber did too. A torturer learns where it hurts. The chamber did too. A torturer stops before killing if it needs the prisoner alive. The chamber did too. The difference, if there was one, lay in the absence of punishment. No test followed disobedience. No pain increased because he refused to move. No stimulus seemed to seek a confession. The room did not punish silence, reward response, or persist with a question until it received a word. It only varied. Recorded. Repeated within narrower margins. That did not absolve it. It only made it harder to hate. On the 7th day, Arlen stopped explaining things aloud. He had spent too much saliva, saying sentences nobody answered. We are Nurian. We came from the Kairos. We are not a threat. Open the door. Maiva is outside. I have to go back. The chamber recorded the sounds, yes, but it did not answer with them. Sometimes it played them back in fragments. Not for meaning, but for structure. Isolated vowels. Consonants. Variations in tone. Durations. Breaths between words. It was not learning what he said. It was learning how saying could be possible. That difference took time to matter to him. After a long sequence of high sounds, Arlen lost control and struck the wall with both fists. You already know how I hear, he shouted. You know how I see. You know where it hurts. What else do you want? The room turned off the light. Not as punishment. He told himself that. Not as punishment. In the darkness, a point appeared before him. Then 2. Then 3. Not numbers, not a greeting, only attention control. The point moved left, then right, then behind him, forcing him to turn. Then it vanished. In its place came a short tone from the opposite wall. Then a vibration beneath his feet. Then a breath of air against the back of his neck. Arlen followed each stimulus without wanting to. Eyes. Hearing. Balance. Skin. Orientation. The room was separating channels. Not to speak. Not yet. To learn how it might do so without destroying him. The idea arrived incomplete, wrapped in anger and exhaustion, not as a conclusion, but as a suspicion. You are measuring me, he said. Nothing. You don't know how to touch without breaking. Nothing. Or you do know, and you're checking. The chamber remained white. Arlen laughed once, dryly, almost without air. That doesn't make things much better. Then, for the first time since he had entered, the chamber stopped testing him. There was no immediate relief. The body does not believe in peace once it has learned to expect stimuli. Arlen remained standing, fists closed, staring at walls that no longer changed. The light held steady. The air did not move. The temperature did not vary. No sound came from anywhere. The silence lasted so long that it stopped being silence and became waiting. When the wall changed, it did not do so with light or sound. A rectangular area stopped being white. For an instant, forms appeared too quickly to understand. Ranges of light, sound frequencies, thermal maps, fields, pressure, breathing, pulse, pupil, muscle, voice broken into rhythm and pause. A Nurian silhouette surrounded by warnings Arlen could not read. Then everything narrowed to 3 figures. Arlen. A second incomplete form, barely suggested by heat, movement, and position. The door. Arlen did not understand. But he felt that something had ended. Not the room. Not the confinement. Only that first terrible way of asking. The wall returned to white. And the 7 days ended without Arlen yet knowing what had begun. Maiva ran toward a door that no longer existed. She saw it close before she reached it. Though close was not the word. The white opening vanished as if it had never belonged to the wall. For a fraction of a second she still had the image of Arlen crossing the threshold, his back lit by that light without a source. One arm half raised, his body leaning toward something nobody had authorized to exist. Then only gray remained. Maiva struck the surface with both hands. Arlen. The sound came back through conduction in the suit, poor and dry. The wall did not vibrate. It did not yield. It did not show a mark. Behind her, Cell shouted something over the channel. Ren asked for biometrics. Tavan repeated that Arlen's signal had vanished, that it had vanished completely, not been blocked, not degraded, vanished. Maiva struck again. Arlen, answer me. Nothing. The channel filled with overlapping voices. Maiva, step back, Ren said. No. Maiva, step back now. No. She pressed her helmet against the wall and tried to listen. It was absurd. She knew that while doing it, there was no air between her and Arlen, no crack, no useful mechanical transmission through a material that had just denied every instrument. Even so, she listened. For less than 4 seconds, she heard nothing. Then the wall opened. Maiva did not even have time to move away. The white line appeared exactly where it had vanished, and Arlen stepped out of it. He did not fall. He did not stumble. He took one step as if returning from an adjoining room, but something about him did not match those 4 seconds. His posture, first, the slowness with which he turned his head, the way his eyes searched the tunnel as if they needed to remember it still existed. The suit was clean, too clean, with new micro-patches in places that had not been damaged before. The visor showed impossible records accumulated in local memory. Maiva caught him by the shoulders. What happened? Arlen looked at her. For an instant he seemed not to recognize her. That was worse than blood. How long? He asked. What? How long was I inside? Maiva checked the suit's external record, more from reflex than need. 3 seconds, 4 maybe. Arlen, what happened? He raised his wrist. On the suit's display was a number that could not belong to the same event. 183 days, 9 hours, 17 minutes. Maiva said nothing. Neither did the Kairos for 1 entire second. Then the channel erupted. That's impossible, Cell said. Arlen confirmed neurological status, Ren said. His watch is corrupted, Tovan said, but he sounded like someone asking permission to believe it. Arlen answered none of them. He looked at Maiva with an exhausted, almost painful intensity, as if trying to compress too many months into a face that had barely changed for her. It wasn't 183 days of tests, he said at last. Maiva swallowed. Then what was it? Arlen looked back at the wall. The surface had become smooth, gray, perfect again. Nothing indicated it had just opened. Nothing indicated that inside there had been a white chamber, 7 days of fear, and almost 6 months of something else. The first 7 days were measurement. Measurement? Light, sound, temperature, pressure, electric fields, magnetic fields, gravity, pain, fear, thirst, hunger, balance, smell, touch, voice. Each word seemed to cost him. It felt like torture. Maiva said nothing. Arlen continued. Maybe it was if you look only from inside my body, but it wasn't seeking a confession. It wasn't seeking obedience. It didn't punish me. It didn't increase the pain when I refused. It didn't want to break me. He breathed with difficulty. It wanted to know where the limit was. Ren spoke over the channel, quieter now. For what? Arlen closed his eyes for a moment. So it wouldn't cross it afterward. Silence returned, shared this time. Maiva was still holding his shoulders. And after? Arlen opened his eyes. After that, the real work began. Communication? Not at first, not the way we understand it. First, stability, repetition without harm, images, pauses, sounds within safe ranges, objects, comparisons, my own recordings, my body as a warning. This breathes, this breaks, this needs water. This must not hear this frequency. This must not touch this radiation. This must not fall toward this field. Maiva lowered her hands slightly, but did not let go. It learned our language. Arlen shook his head slowly. No, it went around my language. It came in through the edges, through what it measured while I thought it was torturing me. It associated sound with gesture, gesture with image, image with reaction, reaction with memory. I spoke. And sometimes I did not know whether I was teaching or being translated. Cell murmured something that never became a sentence. Arlen went on more quietly. It took months because it didn't want to improvise with us. What would have happened if we had entered sooner? Maeva asked. Arlen looked at the sealed opening. We wouldn't have reached the cavity. The interior wasn't made for our bodies. There were radiation fields and gradients capable of turning us into damage before Ren could receive a signal. The chamber began with me, but it didn't end with me. It used my limits to recalibrate the entire interior. Air, pressure, temperature, gravity. It did not build a shelter around us. It made the world stop being incompatible. With us? He looked at Maeva. You were in everything. Not as an image, as a destination. At first, I thought it was studying me. In the end, I understood that I was only the first case. It needed to learn how to speak with any of us without killing us by accident. Maeva looked at the wall again. The wall seemed dead. Is anyone there? Arlen took a moment to answer. Yes. Did you see them? No. Then what did you see? He looked toward the tunnel, toward the impossible direction of Ilar's center. A custodian. The word chilled the channel. I don't think anyone is alive in the way we expect, Arlen said. Not awake, not waiting beside a console. What spoke with me was not a person. It was something left here to decide when someone could enter without destroying themselves. Maeva tightened her fingers on his shoulders. Enter where? Arlen did not answer at once. For 183 days he had tried to obtain names, maps, purposes. For a long time he received only fragments. In the end, enough, not everything, never everything, but a direction. He raised a hand toward the wall. Inward. The gray surface remained still. It wants us to go back in, Maeva said. Yes. Now. Arlen looked at his own reflection, curved in her visor. He seemed older, not from wrinkles, but from distance. I don't know. That was the first lie he told after coming out. He did know. The chamber had not released him because it had finished speaking. It had released him because it no longer needed to speak only with him. Part 3. Those who waited to be born. No one authorized the second entry. That was the first thing Arlen understood with an almost peaceful clarity. There would be no clean order from the Kairos, no protocol signed by Namora, no chain of permissions capable of turning the impossible into procedure. Communication with the ship was working again. But that only made the distance between hearing something and understanding it more obvious. Ren wanted them to return. Cell wanted to send drones. Tovan kept repeating that the gravitational field could change at any moment. From orbit, the Kairos recorded the end of the tunnel as a zone of incomplete data and 2 biometrics that were unmistakably Nurian. Arlen listened to them all. Then he looked at Maeva. You don't have to come. She gave a short laugh without humor. You say that because you spent 6 months without me. 183 days. Don't improve the sentence. The channel fell silent for a second. Even Cell seemed to understand that some answers should not be interrupted. Maeva looked at the wall. Can it kill us? Yes. Does it want to? Arlen took longer. I don't think it wants anything in that way. That isn't an answer. No. Maeva nodded slowly, as if the word relieved nothing but was enough to walk on. The door opened before they touched it. This time there was no total whiteness. The opening showed a narrow, light gray corridor, illuminated from within by a light without a source. It was not horizontal in the planet's true geometry. Nothing there was. The outer tunnel still pointed toward Ilar's center, but the new passage crossed the thickness of the inner sphere in a direction the instruments could not stabilize. Maeva's maps folded over themselves. The suit's gravitational compass changed its mind every few steps. Kairos, we still have a link, she said. Weak, but yes, Cell replied. I'm receiving video. I don't like anything I'm seeing. We had already established that as the general condition, Tovan said. Ren did not join in. Arlen imagined the physician watching his vital signs, searching the numbers for proof that stopping them was still possible. He would not find it. The chamber, or the custodian, had learned too well how to keep him alive. The corridor had no decoration. It did not seem empty either. That was the contradiction. The walls showed no symbols, panels, or markings, yet the light changed with their advance in a way that suggested attention. Not a gaze, not exactly. More like an architecture adjusting itself to the presence of two fragile bodies. Gravity beneath their feet was stable, moderate, deliberate. Radiation was minimal. Exterior pressure was compatible with their bodies. The suit sensors found an oxygen and nitrogen mixture within Nuria's exact margins, suitable humidity, stable temperature, and no dangerous particles. All of that could have been different. All of it was being chosen. Maiva aimed a sensor at the corridor and then toward the cavity. The readings did not change. There was no boundary between a protected passage and a hostile interior. The same air, pressure, and impossibly precise gravity extended in both directions. Ilar was not leading them through a safe zone. It had turned its interior into a place where they could exist. "It isn't protecting us from Ilar," Maiva said. "It's making Ilar compatible with us," Arlen replied. They walked for almost a kilometer. The thickness of the sphere. Maiva said it softly, more to herself than to the channel. "We're crossing the wall." Arlen remembered Third Deep's first data. A structural layer approximately 1 kilometer thick, a perfect shell beneath nitrogen and methane ices, a sphere inside a world that was not a world. At the time, those figures had seemed enormous. Now the kilometer felt intimate, almost domestic, like a threshold between two definitions of reality. At the end of the corridor was another door. It did not open inward or outward. It disappeared, and the world emptied out. Maiva stopped walking. So did Arlen. For several seconds neither spoke, not because there were no words, but because any word would have reduced what stood before them to a scene. This was not a scene. It was a planetary cavity. Ilar's interior was hollow. The inner surface of the gray sphere curved above them until it vanished into a distance the eye was not made to understand underground. There was no sky, but there was height. No horizon, but there was curvature. A preliminary sensor reading calculated an inner radius of nearly 1,230 kilometers. Maiva had to check it 3 times before accepting that they were not inside an enormous chamber, but inside a world turned inside out. A narrow gallery ran around the inner equator, like a technical ring, barely a habitable line clinging to the wall of a colossal structure. From there, the cavity fell toward a center that was not ground but abyss. At the inner poles, 4 immense structures pointed toward the center from each end of the sphere, 8 in total. They did not look like towers, engines, or weapons, though they might have been any of those things in an engineering language older than their species. Each stretched for more than 1,000 kilometers. They were long and dark, made of concentric layers of material that absorbed light and returned it in hair-thin edges. Each ended in an opening aimed at the exact center of the cavity. There a black sphere floated, small compared with the space around it, immense compared with anything the body could accept. The image did not correspond to the naked horizon of a black hole. It was the shadow cast by its containment system, which absorbed light and hid a real horizon too small to resolve at that distance. The darkness did not look like a lack of illumination, but a refusal. Around it, an incomplete metallic shell, like a segmented carapace, kept its distance from the dark sphere. Between them was a ring of faint light, not directly visible, but inferred by the sensors as converted, trapped, drained radiation. Maiva raised a hand without realizing it. "That is." "Yes," Arlen said. She did not need to finish. Sel finished for her from the Kairos, her voice stripped of all irony. "A black hole." Tovan said something very quietly that the channel did not translate well. Ren only breathed. Maiva looked at her readings, discarded them, looked again. "There is no compatible tidal gradient. We are too close." "We are not close to its gravity," Arlen said. "That means nothing." "Here it does." At the center, the black sphere remained still. The 8 polar structures projected invisible fields, or something the Kairos's instruments called fields for lack of a poorer word. They did not cancel gravity. They administered it, bent it, wrapped it, presented it outward as mass and inward as absence. The black hole gave Ilar its impossible weight. The outer sphere decided how much of that weight could exist in each place. Maiva understood in pieces. The mass we saw from outside. It's there, but the surface doesn't feel it because the sphere redistributes it. Yes, and the tunnel. That too. She closed her eyes for a moment. This isn't a ship. The custodian answered. Not with sound. Not with Arlen's voice. The inner wall of the corridor, a few meters from them, lit up with an image. First there was only geometry, the outer sphere, the cavity, the dark center, the 8 polar mechanisms. Then layers appeared inside the wall. Millions of small cavities, arranged in networks covering the sphere like blood vessels in an organism. Each cavity contained something suspended near absolute zero, not bodies, not recognizable embryos, not seeds in the botanical sense. Tiny structures, packed into crystalline matrices, with complex chemical patterns and an organization that made Ren speak for the first time. That is biological material. The image enlarged. Not Neurian DNA, but informational polymers. Not living cells, but instructions capable of beginning again if they found compatible chemistry. Not a species preserved like a statue, but a library of biological possibilities enclosed in cold, minimal radiation and almost geological patience. Maiva stepped toward the image. How many? The custodian displayed numbers. Not in their notation. In magnitudes, the suits translated only after several seconds. Millions of lineages, not individuals. Lineages. Arlen felt the word was too small. The image changed. A star system they did not know, a star whiter than Avran, a planet with dark oceans and low continents, multiple moons, storm bands, then accelerated time, cities like networks of light, orbits full of structures, machines surrounding a star, objects leaving the system. There were no faces, no bodies. Perhaps the custodians still did not know what form of body they could bear without turning it into a false symbol. Perhaps no complete image remained. Perhaps, for that civilization, the body had never been the center of memory. Then came the catastrophe. Not a war, not an impact, not a plague. Or not only one thing. The image showed a star changing, orbital fields failing, radiation flows increasing, planets bathed in high-energy particles, structures abandoning orbits too late. There were scales Arlen could not read, time curves that might have represented decades or millennia. The only clear conclusion was this. The home had become incompatible with those who had built everything. The civilization did not escape whole. It could not. It built Ilar, or something that, with time, would become Ilar. An ark without a crew, because there was no safe destination. A wandering world with an engine that was not an engine, with a contained black hole to sustain energy, mass, and navigation across absurd spans of time. An ice crust to look natural, survive vacuum, and hide from radiation and dust. A material sphere capable of administering gravity, isolating the interior, adjusting the environment. And a custodian designed not to conquer or defend, but to wait until someone with hands, machines, curiosity, or desperation could help it finish the journey. The image went dark. For a long moment, only the cavity remained. The black hole shone without shining at the center. Maiva spoke carefully. What was its destination? The custodian showed stars. Many. Interrupted routes. Corrections. Failed encounters. Systems rejected for chemistry, radiation, orbital age, instability, the absence of suitable worlds, or the risk of biological contamination. Then a point appeared, known to Neurian cartography. Nuria. The crew's home planet. Stable atmosphere, oceans, a complex biosphere. A technological species capable of modifying environments, cultivating organisms, monitoring biological processes, and sustaining projects across generations. The image did not show Nuria as just another refuge, but as an exceptional combination. A world where the seeds might find compatible chemistry, and an intelligence capable of helping them develop. Maiva recognized the code before Arlen did. Nuria. The custodian held the image. Nuria. Then it overlaid other layers, suspended lineages, activation protocols, conditions of humidity, temperature, pressure, and atmospheric composition. On a world without caretakers, those structures might remain frozen or fail upon waking. On Nuria, a living civilization could provide optimal conditions, protect the first organisms, and accompany their adaptation. It wants to go there, Tovan said from the Kairos. Yes, Arlen replied. To our planet. To Nuria. The custodian was not asking permission to cross an empty system. Ilar had slowed, because approaching Nuria without coordination could disturb orbits, satellites, and navigation fields. Its external mass was too great to enter the neighborhood of an inhabited world like any other rock. It needed a local interlocutor to decide whether to accept the seeds, where to receive them, and how to keep the arrival from destroying what it intended to save. The maneuver was not a political bow. It was a safety protocol. The custodian had no diplomatic arms, fleet, or explicit threat. It could manipulate gravity, yes. It could contain an artificial black hole. It could sustain a chamber for subjective months within 4 exterior seconds. But it was not made for war, or, if it had once been, it had abandoned that part. Ilar had stopped before the Kairos to find a species capable of understanding the request, and perhaps not destroying it before it reached Nuria. Then came the offer. Not as a bribe. That would have been simpler. The custodian displayed files. Not all of them. Enough to make Maiva stop breathing for an instant. Gravitational field models that made Nurian engineering look childish. Methods for containing micro-black holes. Controlled conversion of Hawking radiation. Corrections to dark energy theories Nuria still debated in speculative margins. Maps of stable materials under impossible pressures. Biology for cryopreservation across ages. Reversible computation in nearly lossless matrices. Propulsion through internal gravitational gradients. Safety languages for communicating with intelligences whose perception was incompatible. Cell whispered. That is worth more than everything the company has extracted in its entire history. No one corrected her. Because it was true. And because value was precisely the problem. Arlen saw, with a clarity born of 183 days in confinement, what would happen if they sent all of it. Nemora would classify the discovery. The Oral Consortium would claim discovery and recovery rights. The Reserve Authority would invoke civilizational priority. The Systems Council would speak of protection, quarantine, and study. Nobody would say looting. Nobody would say prison. Nobody would say disassembly. They would not have to. Ilar would be surrounded by ships. Its chambers would be opened. Its biological containers would be examined, perhaps preserved, perhaps destroyed, patented if someone found a legal way to do it. The black hole would be considered strategic infrastructure. The custodian, a non-citizen intelligence. The lineages, hazardous material. Nuria, territory of immediate interest. The offer of knowledge would become an inventory. The request would become a case file. All with care. All with arguments. All with fear. Maiva understood at the same time. If they learn it's going to Nuria, they won't let it go, she said. The channel remained silent. Ren was the first to speak. If we report this in full, no. Sel gave a short, broken laugh. If we report half, neither will they. Tovan said. The Kairos can't stop the council. No, Arlen said. And it can't move Ilar. The custodian extinguished the image of the files. The discussion did not end there. Sel argued that Nuria might be precisely the opportunity the seeds needed. If a technological civilization had been able to build biological reserves and maintain them across ages, perhaps it could also learn to receive them without turning them into merchandise. Ren replied that the ability to care did not cancel the ability to dissect. Tovan reminded them that the Kairos had no authority to promise an entire planet. Maiva pointed out that Ilar's design assumed an intelligent species would participate in awakening the lineages. but did not say that species had to be the first one to find them. Arlen listened for hours. In Nuria's favor were known chemistry, laboratories, Nurian experience, and the real possibility of accompanying each lineage's development. Against it were the company, the council, the hunger for materials, and a culture that called everything a reserve that had not yet had time to become property. It was not an argument between good people and bad ones. It was an argument between different risks, and every side could point to corpses to prove it was right. "Can it change destination?" Arlen asked. The custodian did not answer in words. It showed alternative routes. Among them appeared a planet nearly 100 light-years from Avron, inside a broad habitable zone, with oceans, a stable atmosphere, and a simple microbial biosphere. One of the candidates, Nuria, had studied for future terraforming, though no project had advanced beyond long-term archives. Idon. A living world but young in complexity, too far for an immediate colony, too valuable to intervene in without centuries of debate, and, above all, without a technological civilization that could dismantle Ilar before the lineages had a chance. Maiva recognized the code. Idon. The custodian held the image. Arlen looked at the possible planet. It did not offer Nuria's safety. There was no guarantee its oceans would accept those biological instructions, or that its atmosphere could be adjusted without intervention. There was only a probability, and a distance Ilar had already proven it knew how to cross. "Why aren't you going there?" he said. Everyone fell silent. Arlen continued, now speaking toward the cavity rather than the crew. "Nuria seems better because it is already alive. But if reaching it means we open them, classify them, and take them apart to discover what they are made of, it isn't a refuge. It's a quarry with oceans. Idon is more uncertain, but nobody is waiting there with extraction tools." The custodian showed the route between Ilar and Idon. It was not an acceptance, not yet. It was a possibility. The route was clean in an almost insulting sense. Ilar did not need to be pushed. It did not need fuel. It did not need an escort. It only needed the Kairos not to transmit enough, yet to turn the entire system into a cage. Maiva looked at Arlen. "It's asking us to lie." "Yes." "To the company." "Yes." "To the council." "Yes." "To our species." Arlen did not answer immediately. Beneath them, or ahead of them, or inside them, the black hole remained contained by 8 impossible machines. Around the sphere, millions of lineages waited without consciousness, without voices, without guilt. They were not invaders. They were not refugees in the ordinary sense. They were not even the same beings who had built Ilar. They were a biological wager cast into the future. Not the resurrection of a civilization, but the chance for something from it to enter history again, as new life, mixed with a new world, forced to evolve without privilege. "No," Arlen said at last, "it's asking us to decide who counts as our species." No one spoke. The sentence remained there, heavier than Arlen had expected. Because Nuria too was reserve, accumulation, fear of the future. Nuria too gathered in order to survive time. Nuria too would have defended its lineages, archives, seeds, and unborn children if it had known that an indifferent galaxy could erase them. The difference was that Nuria still had a voice. Ilar did not. Maiva looked again at the containers hidden in the wall. "If they reach Idon, they won't be them." The custodian answered with a slow image. "Not of the ancients, not of cities or machines. Molecules entering oceans, chemistry adapting, simple organisms competing, dying, changing. Millions of years compressed into seconds. No recognizable body survived unchanged. No ancient mind woke. No flag rose from the water. Only inheritance altered by a world that did not yet belong to them." "They will be something else," Maiva said. The image displayed a word that was not a word. Continuity. Not identity. Continuity. Arlen closed his eyes. He thought of his nephew walking for the first time in a sunlit courtyard, of the Lady of Copper, of the 22 pages explaining why some lives were not worth saving, of the 6 months in the chamber, of the 7 days when he believed he was being tortured by a faceless cruelty, when in fact an ancient intelligence was trying not to break him through ignorance. Trying not to break him. The phrase returned with unexpected force. Perhaps ethics, at sufficiently large scales, began there. Not in love, not in understanding, not in saving everything, only in not breaking what could still become someone. Kairos, Arlen said. The channel answered with a tense silence. I need you to record this as an interpretation failure. Cell understood first. Arlen. The chamber altered my perception of time. My testimony is unreliable. The internal images are incomplete. Maiva's data are contaminated by interference from the wall. Immediate priority is withdrawal to a safe distance and transmission of a reduced packet, non-hostile object, not mineable by available means, high gravitational risk, remote tracking recommended. Ren said, That won't hold for long. It doesn't have to hold for long. Tovan asked. How long does it need? The custodian displayed a number. Hours. Not many. Enough to reorient the external field and conceal part of the signature, then begin acceleration. After that, even if the Council sent ships, they would arrive late. Eiler was not fast in the military sense. It was patient in the cosmic sense, and it had a destination 100 light-years away that could wait. Maiva spoke over the channel. I confirmed data interference. Cell exhaled. My drones lost useful telemetry at the wall. That's true if you look at it from a morally flexible angle. Cell, Ren said. I'm helping. Tovan added, I can record a withdrawal window caused by gravitational instability. In fact, I would love to withdraw from the actual gravitational instability we are currently inhabiting. Ren took longer. If this goes wrong, there will be no rescue. Arlen almost smiled. That was already in the contract. The physician did not answer. Then he said, I will transmit that your neurological state does not allow a conclusive statement. Thank you. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm documenting a partial truth. The best lies start that way. Maiva cut her voice link for a second. When she returned, she spoke only to Arlen over a private channel. Are you sure? No. Good. Good? If you were sure, I would be more worried. The custodian opened one final image. It was not an offer. It was not a request. It was a record prepared for them. Eiler's route toward Idon, basic parameters for observing it without exposing it, a minimal portion of knowledge, so small beside the complete archives that it seemed like a courtesy sample. Even that sample contained solutions that would change centuries of Neurian physics if someone knew where to look. Maiva received it in isolated memory. This is a trap too, she said. Yes. If we carry it out, someone will want all of it. Yes. If we don't, maybe nobody will believe anything. Maybe that is best for now. She looked at the cavity one last time. What do we tell it? Arlen thought of the white chamber, the light that measured his eyes, the sound that found pain and retreated, the patience without tenderness of an intelligence built to wait longer than entire civilizations. Nothing it doesn't already understand. Even so, he raised a hand. It was not a universal greeting. There were no prime numbers, no geometry, no formal language. Only a Neurian hand, small inside a suit, lifted before a cavity containing a black hole and millions of possible futures. Maiva did the same. The custodian did not answer with light. It answered with gravity. For an instant, barely perceptible, the weight beneath their boots changed. It did not push them or draw them in. It merely touched their bodies with a minimal, brief variation, calibrated with a precision Arlen recognized at once, the first language it had found for them. Not a word. A care. They returned through the corridor without speaking. The outer door opened onto the ice tunnel. The gray wall remained behind them, smooth again. Third Deep's repeaters blinked with diagnostic signals. Gravity still turned a wall into a floor. In the distance, the crater's mouth was a black stain inside another blackness, and beyond it waited Ilar's frozen surface, the shuttle, the Kairos, the company, the council, Nuria, all the systems of belonging that suddenly seemed too narrow for the decision they had just made. The withdrawal was slow, not because of technical difficulty, because neither of them wanted to be the first to turn their back. When the shuttle lifted from the crater's rim, Ilar did nothing visible. It continued to be a dark, icy world, dead in appearance. The Kairos opened its distance along the trajectory Tovan had prepared. Aboard, reports began to be written with surgical care. Words like interference, anomaly, risk, inconclusive, withdrawal, tracking. Words that could tell the truth and hide it at the same time. 12 hours after acceleration, Ilar began to move. There was no flare, no ejection of mass, no engine signature. The wandering planet or arc or tomb or seed simply changed its relationship with local space. The Kairos recorded it as a clean acceleration, low at first and then steady. The outer gravitational field changed shape and confused every eye tracking model for several minutes. From the operations room, the crew watched it leave. No one applauded. Sel's eyes were red and she pretended to review telemetry. Tavan did not take his eyes from the escape curve. Ren stood beside Arlen, not as physician but as witness. Maiva stood before the map, arms crossed, jaw tight. On the main screen, Ilar was a point again, a point with impossible mass, millions of sleeping lineages, and a custodian that had waited perhaps longer than Nuria had possessed a history. 100 light years, Tovan said. A little less along its route, Maiva replied. That wasn't a complaint. Arlen watched the point until his eyes hurt. For them, it isn't far. No one asked whether he meant the custodian, the lineages, the dead who had built the Ark, or the living who might someday exist on Idon, perhaps because the answer was all of them. Nemora's first packet arrived 4 hours after the acceleration. It demanded complete data. The second arrived before they had answered the first. It demanded justification for the withdrawal. The third bore the Council's seal. It used more elegant words and meant the same thing. The Kairos transmitted partial reports full of verifiable uncertainty. It attached damaged readings, incomplete videos, contradictory models. They did not lie about everything. That was the difficult part. A complete lie would have been simpler and less credible. They said the object was non-hostile according to the available evidence. They said the wall nullified sampling attempts. They said the internal geometry exceeded the instruments of a mining ship. They said gravitational risk prevented direct intervention without a specialized mission. They said Ilar had resumed its trajectory before characterization was complete. All true. All insufficient. For weeks, Nemora argued, ordered, threatened audits, and demanded access to primary memories. The Kairos surrendered what it could surrender without condemning Ilar. Some files had been damaged by real interference. Others were declared damaged as a matter of prudence. Ren maintained that Arlen was not fit for formal testimony. That was true as well. Arlen slept little, answered slowly, and spent long periods staring at white surfaces that were not there. Maiva protected the custodian's minimal data in isolated memory. She did not open them. Not yet. If we do, she said one night, everything begins. Arlen sat in the common module with a cup of water between his hands. Since his return, he drank with an attention that unsettled everyone. It already began. Not officially. The largest things rarely wait to become official. Maiva sat across from him. Do you think we did the right thing? Arlen thought of Idon, oceans where perhaps millions of years from now, something would look at a sky it had never chosen. He thought of Nuria, its reserves, its fear, its right to know, and its ability to destroy whatever it knew. He thought of the custodian, alone without being alive, faithful without anyone who could thank it. I think we did something irreversible, he said. Maiva accepted the answer, because it was the only honest one. Ilar vanished from direct sensors 29 days later. Not because it had become invisible. Nothing so theatrical. It simply moved far enough away, with its signature altered enough, to become uncertainty inside a field of dark objects. Nemora's observatories would search for it for years. Perhaps they would recover it in models. Perhaps not. Perhaps in a century someone would notice a minimal perturbation near Idon and remember an anomaly recorded by a mining ship too far from everything. By then, perhaps, it would be too late to stop anything. That was the hope. It was also the guilt. The Kairos slowly returned to its operations. Mining did not stop because a dead civilization had asked for mercy. The furnaces came on, the swarms went out. Asteroids were cut, melted, sorted, sent toward worlds that needed matter in order to keep believing in the future. The company reviewed productivity. The council opened investigations. Nomura archived and unarchived reports as priorities changed. Life, even after the impossible, had a bureaucratic vulgarity difficult to defeat. But something had changed on the ship. No one put it into words at first. Cell stopped calling some small units drones and began calling them custodians when she thought no one could hear. Tovan modified his simulations to include routes that did not rely only on known gravity, but also on deliberate uncertainty. Ren wrote a medical report on Arlen that ran to 112 pages and ended with a sentence unfit for a clinical document. The patient retains operational function, but his moral scale presents permanent alteration. Maiva reviewed Idon on the map every night without opening the custodian's file. Arlen dreamed of the White Room. Not always as a nightmare. Sometimes the light came on and did not hurt. Sometimes a drop fell upward. Sometimes a minimal pressure beneath his feet said something that was not a word, and that he understood, asleep. Months later, when the Kairos received orders to leave Avron and return to a transfer route, Arlen sent one last unofficial packet toward an empty address. It contained no coordinates for Nuria, no technology, no promises, only a brief recording. Maeva raising her hand before Eler's center, Arlen doing the same, and a gravitational pulse recreated with the poor means of a mining ship. A clumsy imitation of the small care the custodian had offered them as a farewell. On. Silence. On. Silence. He did not know whether Ilar could receive it. He did not know whether the custodian would understand. He did not know whether, millions of years from now, some creature on Idon would carry in its cells a memory, without memories of those who had crossed the darkness so it could be born. He knew almost nothing. But he knew that, for one brief instant in the history of two species that had never seen each other, a mining ship had found a world that was not a world, a laboratory that looked like torture, a tomb that was a seed, and an intelligence whose final duty was not to preserve the dead, but to let something of them stop being dead. Ilar continued to recede. Nuria continued to call it an anomaly. The Kairos continued to work. And somewhere between the stars, carrying a domesticated black hole and millions of sleeping futures, a wandering planet continued its journey toward a world where nobody would know how to pronounce the name of its creators. Not yet.